Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. I am here as a part of the Mix It Up Monday Mixed Media Hop, which is hosted by Peacecraft Love over on her Facebook group. And we usually start from a sketch, and this is the sketch we are working with this time. So we are going to scrap lift that sketch and add our own mixed media touches to it. So let's dive in. All right, when I first saw that sketch, I really didn't know what I was going to do. And then suddenly it dawned on me that my daughter just finished up another theater production. She is a theater kid and has several productions a year. And the stars in that sketch, of course, go along very well with my stage star here. So I am going to scrapbook her most recent theater show, and I'm going to use the circle from the sketch to be placeholders for both the title and journaling, and later you'll see me add another circle. Because I am stretching this layout to a double pager, I'm going to tuck some extra photos and journaling and such behind, and as I'm working on materials here, I'm choosing some colors and patterns and trying to figure out how to replicate that burst of stars. And that's when I decide I actually, instead of stars, which I will use a little bit of, I want to punch these little circles here and put the alphabet letter by letter on each of these circles. And that is because the show that she just wrapped up was Matilda. And there is a song in this musical that highlights each letter of the alphabet throughout the song, as well as that becomes a prominent stage, stage scenery, it's part of the show to highlight this alphabet. There we go. So I'm going to replicate that on my layout instead of that burst of stars. And I'm going to do it with ink and the stamping and circle punching that you already saw me do. And I am not going to use much pattern paper on this layout. I've got my circles in pattern paper, which I already cut out with the largest circle die that I have. I could have pulled out my Cricut machine and cut out bigger circles, but I was feeling lazy, honestly, and so I didn't do that. I just grabbed what was easy and fast. So because that's the only pattern paper I'm using, I am going to ink the backdrop to my photos, and that is going to be the grounding to these photos. I've pulled out red, blue, and purple, and I just went to my shelf and grabbed the first big ink pad in any of those colors that I could find, which all happen to be Stampin' Up. And these are water-based dye inks, and that's going to matter when I get to another part of the mixed media. And this is true of almost all dye inks. I know it's touted as something specific to Tim Holtz's Distress dye ink line, but these inks are water reactive, and that's going to come into play as I get there. So you can see I was using the photos in the circle coming in and out and in and out as I was doing that. It did look like a hot mess, and you'll see that hot mess again when I move those photos out of the way. But that's because I was using the hidden space on this layout to kind of make sure I wasn't getting blotches on the rest of the photo or the rest of the layout. And so instead of tapping that ink off on a scratch piece of paper, I was just using the hidden part there. And now I am using this diagonal stripe stencil. And when you're using a very linear stencil, something that has a lot of straight rows of lines, you don't want to go in a circular motion, which you do with a lot of other stencils, but you want to kind of swipe with the grain, so to speak, of the stencil so that it doesn't pop up those edges. And I'm going to do because this doesn't really have the shape of a starburst, which I was really trying to do, but none of my stencils were the right size. Most of my stencils are for card making, and they don't translate very well to a 12 by 12 layout. So I'm going to do this instead. I'm just going to create 3 zones of these stripe bursts. And here is where I'm talking about that mixed media effect with dye inks. I have my spritzer here, and if this is the Tim Holtz one, I don't know about other spritzers, but if you just kind of gently pull the trigger, you get blobs of water instead of gentle spray of water, and that will give you these bleed out effects on that dye ink. And I'm just using, like I said, the Stampin' Up! Inks. This is no specialty ink at all. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing over on page 2, but as I was laying out all my pieces, I decided I needed to add a third circle. Notice I did do my stripes in 3 zones, and that's because the rule of threes is something that I cling to very much when I'm designing. And so since I had my stripes going in 3 zones, I wanted my circles to go in 3 zones also. I am laying out my alphabet buttons, I don't know what you want to call them, alphabet dots around those stripes as that burst, mimicking the stars in the layout. And then I did add a little bit of stitching detail, and this did take a little while, and I do need to clean it up by pulling the threads to the back. So if you've never seen this before, you just kind of lift up the back thread, and as you pull it, the front thread will make a loop, and then you can slip a pin through that loop and pull it to the back. And then you've got this very clean, tidy stitch look. And now I've got to tidy up the second page. And then it is time to put everything back together again. I did use pencil markings to try and keep the placement of all my elements obvious as I'm putting things back together. But nothing ever goes back exactly how you started off with it, and I'm trying to get things back in place where they're not hiding too much of the other elements, like especially those alphabet letters there. I didn't want to hide those away. I wanted to make sure that they were showing up. And you'll see here in a moment, as I'm trying to get these things lined back up, I realized that my journaling circle, I wanted it to underline my daughter there with her hands up in the air, but because of how I placed my photo, the circle was getting up too high, and it was competing for attention too much with my daughter, and the circle were competing too much, and the circle was becoming prominent. So just sometimes a shift in position can make a difference in how the eye reads things. At any rate, I've moved on to my title. So I just lined up the same alphabet stamps I used to stamp those little circle embellishments. I just lined those up directly on my layout and then used a big enough block to pick them all up at the same time and made any slight adjustments to it that I needed to. And now here's where I'm going to add a few stars into this layout, because that was the idea that's the sketch, first of all. And then that was the idea to lead me to telling this story to begin with. So I want to make sure to get some of those stars in there. And I'm going to mix and match a mishmash of stars that I have in my little star bin here. So I've got some sequin style stars, some gold chipboard stars, some acrylic stars, some fabric stars, just kind of a little mix of everything. And then I will get all those glued down, and I will get my journaling in place. And that will wrap up my portion of this mixed media hop this time around. Be sure to go and check out the other hoppers and see how they have interpreted this sketch. And I always love when we have this idea and everybody's minds takes it in a different direction. It's great to see that. So I will leave you with that. I have lots of things in the works for this week and next week, so I hope you will come back to the channel. And until then, I hope you have an artful day.